Well, I'm just so tickled to be welcoming you to the grieving place, Krista. Thank you for saying yes to having a conversation about the messiness of being human, which includes death and dying.
Sure does. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, and as I'm welcoming you here, I have to kind of smile because I'm looking at your beautiful glasses and I wonder if I'm a bereaved person and I'm coming to you for guidance about how to navigate, the death of one of my people, how you must be, just your beautiful presence must be a disruption for people, oh, this is going to feel a little bit different. It's not what I expected in someone who is, going to take care of me and my person.
Very sweet of you to say. It's interesting. I sometimes joke that I am not what you think of when you think of a funeral director, of an embalmer, and maybe even an end of life doula. I think that we have we have sort of images in our minds for all of those things, and I tend not to fit that very well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's maybe room now more than ever for us disruptors to be linking arms, joining forces, embracing each other's contribution to the messy places that most people don't want to spend any time in until they find themselves overwhelmed, until they find themselves struggling because their person has died, and then they themselves are navigating the tortuous waters of what comes next.
Mhm.
So maybe share with people you have this beautiful offering, Death's Apprentice. You've been doing this deeper work, but you are newer to the death trade. So maybe share a little bit more about what has drawn you to this beautiful body of work.
Sure. When I was probably in my 20s, I actually first became interested in the idea of death caring. And I knew that something like nursing was not going to be a possibility, given that I really struggled to sort of pass grade 10 biology, And in my mid 40s, I was like, no, I don't think that's the route. So things like palliative nursing or something was
Ah,
not on the table, but I really I couldn't sort of stop hearing this call into death caring. And so that really did mean funeral directing for me. And the problem was is that every time I looked at how to become a funeral director, it was always like quit your very high paying corner office job and go back to college and for 2 years and become a an apprentice for 2 years all at the same time. And I was just like, oh,
come
I
on,
can't do it.
what's
I
not
can't
to
do it.
love about
Yeah,
that? Come on.
what's not to love, right? I got to tell you. And but I couldn't stop hearing the call towards it. And so I just finally thought to myself, you know what? I'm either going to be that guy who's like, I would have made a great quarterback, or I could actually do this thing that was kind of scary, especially being, like thinking about it for honestly a couple of decades, being in my mid 40s. When I stepped into that, I'm in my mid 50s now. And I actually remember you're sometimes never too old to be worried about what your mom will think. My mom was in her 80s at the time, and she was a woman that really she a bit snobby, I'm going to say, and had ideas about what were good careers. And being the principal of Canada's largest international college and having, again, this corner office and this sort of stature within my educational community, that was a good job as far as she was concerned. And I was seriously getting close to 50. I was afraid of telling her what I wanted to do, but I finally did. And what was amazing is that I said, Mom, I have something to tell you. And I leaned forward, and she knew it was serious. My mom had dementia at this point, but was still very, functioning very well. And she said, okay, dear. And I said, Mom, I'm changing jobs. And she thought immediately that I was going to get a promotion. And and I said, no, 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 I'm really changing jobs, Mom. I'm going to do something that I've been thinking about for a long time. And well, what's that, dear? And I said, Mom, I'm going to become a funeral director. And she was dead silent, pardon the pun. And I thought, okay, here we go. And she leaned forward, she took my hands.
Oh,
She said, well, dear, I just couldn't imagine anyone better.
oh.
Isn't that incredible?
So
And
fascinating.
it was so beautiful. And I was so worried for so long about what
Yeah.
she would think. And it turns out I didn't have to worry at all.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because, we're uh, death in general in society is something that in our Western, particularly white Western society, we have really pushed
Mhm.
so far away that it's not necessarily seen as like a good job, a good career. And and I that was probably part of my resistance for those 2 decades when I had been thinking about it. Um, but I got to tell you, it has been truly life-changing. Moving into death caring has been truly life-changing for me.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. And what I'm appreciating is, I like to do my homework on people before I connect with them. And you and I have connected now. We both know Megan, right?
Yes,
And so a
Megan.
friend of Megan is a friend of mine. Same with you. And so I was really intrigued by your story and what drew you because we were talking about this beforehand. You aren't you aren't like when we think about a funeral practitioner, you call it, the death care trade, right? It's
Mm,
like providing care to people when often they are at their most vulnerable.
mm,
And I'm referencing the bereaved people, but then to approach the person who has died with reverence, with dignity, with awe. Maybe share a little bit more about the courage it took because it sounds like you were suppressing the part of you that already knew that you wanted to do this 20 years ago.
mm, mhm.
And so what did it take? Was there something, a whisper from the future or something that actually energy that activated inside of you that said, if not now, then when? If not me, then who?
Mhm. Yeah, I love that idea of a whisper from the future. It's amazing what being sort of in misalignment can do. And I think I was in misalignment in my work as a principal in a public-private partnership with a very big, Western Canadian university and a very big multinational educational corporation. Um, and I was I was in a very senior role in that realm, and I just was getting up every morning going, God damn it, like what we say we're doing and what we're doing are not the same things. And it it was sort of living inside me, and it was making me really unhappy. And I think that I think that stepping out of that work and really just quitting. I actually kind of tried to get fired for a year because I saw people all around me getting fired and getting these beautiful big payouts. And I was like, wonder if I could
Pick
get fired.
me, pick
Pick
me.
me, pick me. And I couldn't. And so I finally just said thanks. And the board was so surprised, but I said, no, I'm done. And there was no real sort of defining moment, but I will say that in my last especially few years as a principal, and this was pre-COVID as well. We had a very big campus with like over 3,000 students on it. These students were what you would call traditional age. So they were first and second year students. And so they were 17, 18, maybe 19 years old, young people. And they were from all over the world because it was an international college. And and with that many people, just demographically, if you have 3,500 people between the ages of 17 to 19, um, one of them, maybe two of them, are going to die in the course of a year. That's just demographics, right? Now, if you have that many people who are 65 or 85, that number goes up a lot. But every year you can absolutely count on one person dying, probably by an accident of some description. And goodness gracious, that certainly happened every year at the college, and with no training, and with only the fact that I was the head of the college, I would be pulled in to this role of assisting, making phone calls to parents on the other side of the earth to give them the worst news that they could ever imagine getting, right? And the repeated exposure of that, again, with no training and no support and whatnot, I would always be meeting funeral directors, and I would think to myself, either one of two things. I would think, that was the coolest person I've ever met, and what an incredible, like, walking hero on this planet.
Mm.
Or I would kind of cross my arms and think, what an absolute jerk.
Uh-huh.
I could do way better than that.
Hmm.
And those two things sort of happening over and over, a period of a few years, and not really having it go any easier. Again, no training, no understanding of the death landscape, no under, you learn quickly what happens after you die. But in my circumstances, I was dealing with people from all over the world, so each individual thing was quite different, and there would be like shipping people home or consulates involved and whatnot. So it was sort of different, and it was only happening once or maybe twice a year, so it wasn't like being immersed in it. But it was those experiences, and typically a wonderful person on the in what I call the death landscape that I would sort of latch onto and learn from, that eventually made me say, yeah, you know what? This is the thing that's gonna, like, I am finally going to step away from this and go look at that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story. It really feels like it's your why. And as you're
Yeah.
modeling, we're never too old to
Yeah.
live into our purpose. And, people who have listened to me speak before know that my why came as a result of the death, tragic death of my younger sister, Tracy, right? She was
Yes.
29, I was 32, both of us new moms. And learning to navigate the before and after, the multiple befores and afters, and
Mhm.
also appreciating the way in which we were held, companioned
Yes.
by the funeral directors and that larger community in a really beautiful way. I think I just carried that with me, and in part, that is what has inspired my work into the world.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, I'm grateful for the conversation, and it's often, I don't know if this is your experience, I suspect it is, when we are at dinner parties and people lean in, as they often do, and say, "So, what do you
Tell me
do?"
about what you do. Yeah.
Right? And I now no longer ask that question. My
Yeah.
question is, tell me more about you.
Yes.
I want to know about
Yeah.
you, the
Yeah.
beautiful person in front of me. So when people ask you what you do, I often don't lead. I bury the lead and I talk about my career in sport, right, as a strategist and leadership coach. And then I weave in, depending on how long we're talking, my passion for this work around grief and loss and helping people navigate life transition. So take us to, what is your elevator speech? How are you an advocate for the death care trade?
It's a lovely question, and still a few years into my own little business, still a hard one for me to answer. I find I land very much where you talk about in that dinner scenario, where I will sort of gauge what's happening around me. And I typically will get one of two responses, where people are either just like, and you can almost feel the air sucking out of the room, or people are just like, oh, are you serious? That's so cool. And tell me more. And so that's interesting. Now, in my work, so I am a licensed funeral director and embalmer. I
Mm.
am also an end of life doula. And I talk about death in very public ways so that we can make it a more normal part of life. I believe that death is a very normal part of life, and we have forgotten that. So that's what I do. I talk about death so that we can make it a more normal part of life.
Yeah. I so resonate with that. The word doula means to be in service of, right?
Hmm.
You are in service of the dying experience from the moment someone starts to transition towards end of life and supporting the family in a more intentional practice. And I meet you there. I've taken a full course on death doulaship. My passion really has been more in supporting the grief experience that lives alongside the death or the
Mhm.
ending experience. And I love when I was playing with the word because I'm a professional coach. There was something too transactional around the word grief and coach. Although in the early days, that's what I
Mm,
was calling myself, a grief coach. And that
sure.
really attracted a certain typology of people who wanted to find the playbook, the recipe, if you will, how
Yes.
to like get over this thing called grief. And we learn over time, of course, and hard work and pain that when we do the grief work, it works. And it works because we are not denying the pain, we're befriending our grief, becoming a
Yes.
student of it, right?
Yes.
And the
Yes.
same is true for death. It is unconscionable and cruel, unusual for us to not be normalizing end of life and death experiences the way we used to do. I love what you said. We have forgotten, been conditioned, might be a more
Yeah.
accurate way of describing in our capitalistic world, that it is inconvenient for us to die because then we're not producing or consuming. So
That's
maybe say
right.
a little bit more about like the edge that you bring such a refreshing perspective to
Mm.
the death care trade. Even you saying it's not the death trade, it's death care. So maybe what's hard for you as a
Mm.
woman, as someone who wears like amazing glasses, just gonna put it out there. I wonder if there's a glass for every day of the week. I'm just gonna ask.
There's a few, I guess. There's a few.
So what are some of the things that are hard for you as someone who's championing a more holistic approach to death care?
So a couple of big things are really happening for me now in particular. What's kind of neat, it has a really positive side as well, is that death doulas are becoming kind of chic. We're kind of having a moment. Death is the new black, if you will.
Right,
And um, and what is happening in sort of public like discourse is that this misinformed description of what doulas are is kind of taking over in the public discourse. And so many people think, so first of all, people used to be like, well, what the hell is doula? And actually, that was easier in some ways because now what's happening is a lot of people think they know what a doula is because Nicole Kidman says she wants to be one, or because, and all blessings to Nicole, come on in, right? Um, or because we see a doula represented on The Pit, which is a huge American TV show right now. The thing is that what when people think about it, they think that doulas are uh, just for people who are actively dying. They think of doulas as people who are quietly sitting vigil at a bedside, or holding hands and gently ensuring that there's lavender being spritzed around the room of a dying person. And I gotta tell you, I don't really do any of that. Like I am not a vigiling doula. I would absolutely vigil for people who I have served in other ways, but I will absolutely help families figure out a vigiling schedule. I will, when people don't have that, there are options and opportunities. But here in Canada in particular, we do have a relatively uh, intact hospice care system that relies very heavily on volunteers and volunteerism, which is amazing and wonderful. But that exists, and that's where you will see a lot of the really active, like end of life, active dying, vigiling, that kind of stuff. Whether or not these people have doula training, they've learned this through all sorts of other ways, through personal experiences, through what have you. Do you need to take a course somewhere? No, but if you do, please take mine or a couple of others that are quite good. Stay away from those crazy AI generated nonsense things right now. But what we actually do as doulas is three other things. So yes, there's this little pillar of vigiling and emotional support, but we're also educators. That's really where I plant my flag. And you asked about what is hard. That is one of the hardest things. I need to educate people about all sorts of aspects of not just dying, and then the act, like the actual before dying, and the act of taking your last breath, and then being dead. So this the education that needs to go into sort of that realm, enormous, very difficult. So doulas educate. We also work in the advance care planning realm, right? Where we're really here to help make sure that you have your affairs in order and from a holistic perspective. And the other thing that we do is legacy work, grief work. Many of us do are quite connected, closely connected to grief work. Um, and and that simple fact of people thinking that doulas are this one thing. Oh, I hear all the time, oh, I would love to have a doula when I need one.
Right.
Well, when do you think that is, friend? That is actually right now. So that's
Exactly.
probably the hardest thing. And I think that the other thing that's not super easy is that it's only been since 2014, so just, 10, 12 years now that women have been coming into funeral work in particular at a greater rate than men. And so it is a feminizing profession, but there are still a lot of old men in this profession.
Yeah.
And that does cause some that you get a little bit of that's not how we did it in our day, actually
Right.
more than a little bit. And so I find that difficult as well. And frankly, it's many of the actions that those men enacted that give funeral directors and embalmers such a bad reputation in the first place. So those are the difficulties that I face.
hmm I thank you for talking about the panacea. So when we serve in the death care trade, we kind of stand up for, even though it may not be natural to us, becoming educators to provide language for people,
Hmm.
help them understand this landscape of grief, this landscape of death there's going to be many things that you're going to need to discover. And we, as their companion, as their doula, we can predict certain pitfalls because, we've done some of the work, we've studied, right? We can anticipate some of the things that will help them ease the transition, ease the pain. And
Yeah.
part of the work that I do often is say, listen, suffering is a part of the human condition. But unnecessary suffering is what I try to advocate on behalf of.
Yeah.
Your suffering is a natural part of the disconnection, right? The navigation of this loss experience to someone or something that you've become attached to. And so it's supposed to hurt. Now,
Hmm.
what creates trauma, and trauma is in our body, and we can't get to the grief until we resolve the trauma. And so many of the people I support have been traumatized because they didn't receive the education, the knowledge,
Yes.
the support to navigate this really difficult experience. And so I really appreciate you reminding all of us that this is where knowledge is power,
Absolutely.
right? And in our, disintegrating patriarchal society, capitalistic, society, that everything now is kind of being dismantled. It needs to.
It
You're
does.
you're navigating now, those of us who see things differently, because we weren't really involved in shaping the system, the policies, the procedures, the rules of the pool that we are now swimming in. So part of
Yes.
what we're doing, and you said the word, we are reclaiming
Mhm.
healthy practices, rituals, ways of being. We know how to die, just like women know how to birth children into the world. And yes, there are complications. We know that. We can anticipate that there may be complications.
Absolutely. Are there some
Right.
best practices that we should have in place? Absolutely. But
Uh-huh.
do our bodies know how to do this for the most part? Yes,
Exactly.
absolutely.
And the way that you're
Yeah.
speaking about this, so Catherine Mannix, right, who's a
Yes,
world
yes.
icon when it comes
Yeah.
to speaking about end of life, and her as an advocate for hospice care and dignified end of life experiences. She recounts this beautiful story about when she was a young doctor, wide-eyed, and just watching the way her mentor was supporting someone. And that story of this frail elderly woman who was so scared of dying. And the doctor, her mentor, took her hand and started to speak to her about what would be happening to her as she died. And then the woman turned to him and had this like beautiful smile on her face, and I can rest now. And so
Yes.
Catherine took that story and then became a champion for death literacy so that people aren't suffering unnecessarily as they're navigating the experience.
Mhm. And, for so many, not all, but for so many natural deaths, pain is really not something that is going to be involved at all.
Right.
Um, and and when it is, it's usually because of an underlying disease or illness or whatnot, and it can be managed. This is one of the greatest things about the modern hospice movement, right? Like, whew, can absolutely be managed. But I know even my own sister, actually, I remember her saying, I hated seeing the way dad was grimacing. And I'm like, oh, no, he wasn't in pain.
Yeah.
Like these are natural reactions. And we're really quite certain because of other indicators that he was not in any pain.
Mhm.
Those flashes that you saw across his face, don't be scared. Or what's happening at the end of a natural life and a natural death with breathing changes. Some people are like, oh my gosh, they're drowning, they're suffocating. None
Yeah.
of these things are actually happening.
Uh-huh.
And in my role, one of the lovely things about being an end of life doula is that it is a non-medical role. So I don't prescribe, I don't diagnose.
Mhm.
I can, however, with confidence, I can explain what I've seen before,
Yeah.
and I can help people know what questions to ask the doctors and nurses and wonderful carers that are often, especially again in the Canadian context, we are often lucky enough to be
Yeah.
surrounded by when a death does have a medical presence, which of course doesn't have to be always.
Yeah, exactly. I feel this enormous relief, right, in speaking to you about this because often when we do this kind of work, I don't know about you, but you feel like a little bit isolating, because there isn't
Mm-hmm.
that many of us. It's not like there's this giant guild of death doulas, and there's beautiful work being done across this
Hmm.
country and in places around the world, of course. And the popularization of the death doula, the myths around this
Yeah.
it doesn't it counters what the real work, right, of humaning.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is us humaning together, right? Like, let's be clear. I wanted to share with you. So I like you am feeling a shift in the wind.
Yeah.
And I've been doing in my day job, I work in sport, in elite sport. And I've been doing this for over 35 years. So I have a passion for human experience and human flourishing. And, as it turns out, when I speak to people about sport and then talk about my passion of grief and loss, there's like a cognitive dissonance, like how
Sure.
do those two worlds collide? And yet when you look at the construct of sport, in it is loss all the time, right? People, young bodies and minds have to learn how to process what is happening to them, the attachment to the outcome, the reward for speed, teammates being transacted off the team, coaches being transacted onto the team. So the incubator that is sport is rife with loss, and with loss comes grief. So
Hmm.
I recently was invited to be a keynote speaker at the gathering, the summit here in Ottawa, where Olympians and Paralympians joined after their performance in Milano Cortino this past February and March. And it's a tradition, right, where we welcome and celebrate the athletes for their extraordinary experiences.
Hmm.
And I was the first speaker, and I opened up with, "Hi everyone, welcome to our session. I make a living out of talking about things that no one wants to hear."
Another elevator pitch.
Mic
Yep.
drop, right? And,
Yep.
and I could see people lean in. And I talk about grief and loss and all the messiness of being a human. Anybody here relate to that? You could see people like sit up straighter. So the feedback I received after athletes coming to me and talking to me, thanking me
Yeah.
for providing language to a lived experience. And what
Hmm.
I'm observing with this next generation, because they're so consumed by this thing,
Hmm.
a version of truth, and now with AI, their bodies are like there's this yearning for authenticity. And you don't get more authentic than when you're birthing a child into the world, I would offer, and witnessing someone dying. To me, that's an embodied experience because you can be nowhere else but in that moment, witnessing with awe and reverence. And what I would offer, having birthed three children into the world and watching my sister Tracy die and my father, the holding container for this shared experience had me, living into my being in very similar ways. It
Yeah,
it
I
it
do know.
was love and reverence and wanting to ensure that the entry into the world for the babies was filled with love and awe and respect and generosity. And the same was true for my sister and my dad. And as I'm talking this through with you, I'm so grateful to you, Krista. What
No.
is now available to me is I didn't get that experience with Tracy. We were so
Mm.
traumatized, the seven of us as sentinels, right? Just watching my sister struggle with her last breath. And then they disconnect the machine and the beep, beep, beep. So trauma inducing. And there was no
Yeah.
ritual, there were no people around
Yeah.
us. All of the nurses were in shock and
Yeah.
doctors. They had come to love Tracy. And so, 20 years later, me engaging in ceremony with six other humans who were each representing the people that had been beside me while Tracy died. And
Hmm.
one of the women turning towards me, representing my mom, who mothered me in that moment.
Hmm.
Beautiful music and a sense of community. And what I can share with you is that ritual, right? When we talk about ritual, we're not talking about religion and in the context of ritual with religion, although that may be available
You
for
could
people.
be, but yeah, for folks for whom that is available, sure.
Exactly. I'm
Yeah.
talking about human heart to human heart,
Yeah.
creating a creative cauldron where people's lived experience can be witnessed
Yeah.
and supported. And, 20, I think it was about 23 years later, I could feel my grief move yet again, being held in that sacred ritual that I did not know I needed until I was
Right.
immersed in it. Yeah.
You know, that is it's such a beautiful story and such a beautiful image. I can really imagine that sort of recreation and how wise of you to know that you needed those sentinels and you needed those figures and whatnot. It's I'm going to go back to a question that you asked me a couple of minutes ago about what is the hardest, what is the hard thing in the work that you do. The other hard thing that happens for me is people who phone or connect into me and say things like, "Well, I want to get my funeral arranged." Well, not a funeral, of course. I really just mean my cremation. I mean, can you just tell me what the simplest thing is that I can do? And by simplest, they usually mean cheapest. And we have devalued death in our society. Like we've literally hidden it away. It's like we don't talk about it, we don't deal with it, we don't whatever. It is the actual definition of devaluing it. And this is also why people are like, well, I don't see any value in spending money at the end of after the end of life. And so getting these, I got one yesterday from this lovely person who said, well, I'm X number, I'm in my 70s and everything's fine. I'm just looking ahead. I want to make things as simple as possible for my kids. That is beautiful. Both of my parents prearranged. I am prearranged. Like that is a giving, it is a huge gift to do that. Takes so much pressure off people. The next thing out of her mouth was just whatever simplest. I don't want any fuss or bother. And this is what's happened is we have somehow equated caring for
Uh-huh.
dead human bodies
Uh-huh.
and creating ritual as fuss and bother. And it's
Uh-huh.
in fact none of those things.
Uh-huh.
When we so I was actually able to talk to this woman and explain to her that a what she was talking about was a called direct cremation, picking up from place of death, making sure there's not a pacemaker, you're not removing a band-aid or any medical equipment. You're not cleaning the body. You're not bathing the body. You're not dressing the body. There is nothing sacred at all in any of this work. Placing the body into a rigid-sided container so that it can be transported to the crematorium. Off we go. Now, I I explain that. I'm not judging that. There
Of
is
course.
absolutely a purpose to that. But then I said, could I ask you, have you chat? She told me she had kids, and I said, have you chatted with your children about this? Because I wonder how they would feel if they knew that your body wasn't going to be bathed and dressed. Do you think that it might be possible that the children, especially if they weren't able to be present with you at the end, might want a moment with your body for some time and some healing, some closure before you're you're taken for cremation? And she was just instantly like, well, yeah, of course. And I'm like, well, you see, that isn't what you asked for. And unless you have somebody who is, I mean, I obviously wasn't all preachy with her like this, but unless you have somebody who is willing to sort of say, well, can we dive a little deeper? If you've got some AI generated form that you're filling out on the internet because that's the easiest and cheapest thing to do, and you're going with an agency that is cremating your body in a different country and paying unlivable wages to a bunch of apprentices, great, okay. But most of us are not, well, many people make choices in life like shopping at farmers markets or not buying from Amazon or whatnot, and
Uh-huh.
we can care, those are values based decisions that we have weighed carefully. We throw all that out when it comes to death, and we're just somehow like defaulting to this, well, just whatever's quickest, whatever, and people don't even know what they're missing. In the case of you being with your sister at the end of life, we none of those carers, in the nurses, the doctors, none of them were trying to do anything wrong,
No,
but there was this sort of shock and a now what kind of that filled the room, instead of this ability to say, okay, now let's take some time, let's not move, let's not do anything, let's let's let you sit, let's let you be, let's let's think about what we are going to do before we move one hair on the head of this beautiful young woman, right? We can do all of that relatively easily. None of it necessarily has to cost money. Families can, or significant money, families can be engaged with it, or they can say, well, actually, I don't feel comfortable doing that. Perhaps you could do that for me. That's what somebody like me, a mortician, is very, very good at. Um, but I can also teach you how to do it because it's not as scary as you might think. Remembering, of course, that not everyone dies peacefully in a bed after a certain amount of time where we've all managed to gather. There are a gazillion ways to die, and we're not failing if we die one of those ways instead of, surrounded by family at the end or whatever. So yeah, that is the other thing that is so hard and yet so incredibly important, because the making space for ritual, even as simple with this woman as bathing the body, dressing the body, and having a short 2 hour visitation available if anybody wanted it. Even that will make a difference in the grief journey that the people who love her are going to go on.
exactly. Yeah, you're speaking about humanizing, not pathologizing
Hmm.
human experience through these practices that have been tried and tested over centuries, right? We're not inventing this, we're
Nope.
returning. It's a reclamation to human practices because, in a real way, what our North American society has done is made death and dying and grief and grieving an inconvenient truth,
Oh
right?
yeah.
It's this, let's put it over here and pretend this isn't going to happen so we can stay stuck in whatever, you know, um, hamster wheel.
Fast moving. Yes, exactly.
Exactly. So, as we wind down our conversation, one of the things that I've learned as a grief doula in my studies is the care for the professional. And you referenced it, right? That so many of the clients I now advocate for is within the healthcare industry. because so many of them aren't equipped to learn about their own grief, their own healthy healing practices, these structural institutions and systems and policies and procedures, let's call them ways of being,
Yeah.
were designed in a time that really isn't reflective of the current, more contemporary approaches to grief and loss and death and dying. And certainly not informed by, I would say, women and women of color,
Mm,
people of color. So part of what I love to ask is, as the human inside the profession, is there something that you want to share with us around what grief has taught you that nothing else could?
grief has taught me that it will not just go away. It it demands, it will make demands of you that you won't be able to manage if you don't manage them head on.
Yeah.
Um, and and grief has taught me that like we can get pretty good at thinking, I can, sleight of hand, and I can move this over here, and I can, I can move money between accounts and make it all work out. And there's so many ways that we can, often with relative success, just kind of keep a lid on things and keep going. But we can't do that with grief.
Mm,
It will come out,
yeah.
and it will knock us over like a freight train. And if we, and we have these awful systems and structures around us, 3 days for grief leave, in Canadian law, right? Like, come on, like what? Right? Like what? Like it makes absolutely no sense to me. And this idea that you could somehow sort of be better. Oh, well, you've taken a day to make their funeral arrangements, a day for the funeral, and then the day after the funeral. Like what? We culturally, societally don't make space for grief, which makes it very hard for people to make space for grief in their own personal day-to-day lives. And that's why the work that folks like us are doing is so important. Grief will erupt out of us if we don't make space for it. And I, as a professional, learned that because I got to tell you, at school, as a student funeral director, and then as a new emerging professional, nobody had ever, none of my mentors, and I put that in quotes, in the corporate system, had ever said, by the way, self-care is more than a bath bomb, and boy, did it come out holding so much grief, and not knowing even that I was, other people tertiary grief, right? Um, was Could have been career ending almost before it even got started. So yeah, the lesson that grief has taught me is that it is one big muscular mofo that you do not want to, you need to just be like, all right, all right, all right, come and get me.
I love that. It's to be a servant or a student
Yeah,
for grief, which is
yeah,
grief. What are you here to teach me in this
yeah.
moment? Because as you've, created for me, it's all about space and witnessing. And even though this practice, this ritual I engaged in, years ago now, that helped me be with my grief in it from a different place, when you share it and someone receives it and hands it back to you, there's another part of you that heals. This is the secret sauce of companionship, right? Where we can companion each other through life's dark stages. And out of that comes intimacy, and we forge bonds in ways that are true, right? And that
Hmm.
that I think is what humanity is longing for now, is more
Yeah,
truth, right? Realness,
yes.
not a version of it that is convenient. So as I was listening to you, I was feeling this like, let the great unraveling begin. And that is what the
Mm,
research will teach us, right? That
that's so
these
true.
stugs, these sudden temporary upsurges in grief, they are normal, natural, and you will carry them with you the rest of your life because the relationship you had with your person is something
Yeah.
you're going to carry with you for the rest of your life, right?
Hmm.
It's they who disavow that make it uncomfortable and inconvenient because of these 3 to 5 days that we've reduced grief and death and dying to. So, as we prepare to say goodbye, any final thoughts for younger, newer people coming into the death care trade? Any other bits of wisdom that you want to impart on all of us, dear Krista?
Ah, you're so sweet. Well, you know what you bring, your voice is needed, and you may not be saying anything. So we need your voice, and you are probably not saying anything new, and that's okay.
Mhm.
That's actually adding to what has already been said. You're going to be saying it. I'll bet you anything, you're going to be saying it in a different way. You're going to say it in a way that other different people can hear. Don't ever get overwhelmed and think, oh, I don't really, there's already people in this space doing this stuff. Yeah, but they're not you. And you are needed and your voice is needed. I need to hear it. And whenever you need to hear my voice or the voice of others around me, be in touch so that we can strengthen and build this community.
Mm. That's a beautiful invitation. A chorus of voices, right?
Of course.
To remind us of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm just so delighted that we had a chance to connect in this way. I know people will be nourished by not only your voice and the way in which you are helping us be less fearful about a natural human experience, but also for your advocacy work and education work in reminding us that reclaiming a right relationship with death and the dying experience is actually beautiful work.
Mm, Well, it was just my absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for this.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much and look forward to the next conversation.
I can't wait either.